notorious forest pathogens that has hit North America. And it was first discovered in Wisconsin in 1941, and since then has been studied throughout the range of oak wilt in the United States, and it actually occurs in, I think it's about 23 other states. And as a result of that range, many states have been working on oak wilt, as I say, since the early 1940s, and there has been a lot learned about this disease and the pathogen that causes it. So that Mung Mung asked me to talk about 30 minutes, and I am unfortunately not going to be able to cover the entire body of knowledge about oak wilt. I am going to focus on oak wilt as it occurs in Texas and some of the unique things about our forest type here in Texas and how the pathogen behaves in it. So if there's anyone out there in another state, you can kind of compare how your host type compares with our host type and make some inferences from that about how the pathogen spreads. Oak wilt is indeed caused by a fungus. The name of the fungus is Ceratocystis fagacearum, and Ceratocystis fagacearum is a vascular parasite, which means that it infects and colonizes the very outer growth rings of an oak tree. And as you get deeper into the wood of the tree, the fungus does not survive. And it is a true parasite. It derives its nutrition from a living host. It is a very poor saprophyte, and this plays a role in how this organism behaves in the oak trees, and I'll bring that up again in just a few minutes. And it does indeed produce two kinds of spores. It has a sexual spore in nature, in which it produces, it's a typical ascomycete, and it also has an asexual spore, the conidia, which are depicted in this image at the bottom of the two images right here. These are the spores which distribute throughout the vascular system of the tree as the fungus colonizes after it's introduced into the tree. It's something that people are a little incredulous about, but it is a very heat-sensitive fungus. And you might ask yourself, well, why would we have such a problem with it here in Texas? And I will address that as well. But this is something I always point out to people in Texas, is that at temperatures above 90, 95 degrees, it will be killed if it's exposed to those kinds of temperatures for a very long period of time. But it has adapted to Texas very nicely and has ways of getting through those periods of very high heat. As I said, it occurs in 22 other states in the United States. We're not sure where the oak wilt fungus came from. I speculate that perhaps maybe farther south in Mexico or Central America, and during the last ice age, as the ice receded, the fungus moved its way up with the oak trees as they started to colonize North America. But at this point, it is found nowhere else in the world except the United States. This is what the distribution looks like in Texas. We have a map on the left which kind of shows an intensity map where the dark brown indicates where the disease incidence is higher, and then the disease incidence drops off as we get away from there. You will notice that it is found in what we call the hill country of Texas, in central Texas. It is not found over in the East Texas piney woods, although we have a lot of host type. And we also have an additional county over here. It was recently found up in Amarillo. And for those of you not familiar with Texas, trees pretty much stop about right here. As we start going farther west and farther north, we get into the classical Great Plains type of ecotype, and there are really no native trees up in that part of the state. So everything's planted as we get up in there. These are the main Texas oaks that are affected by oak wilt. Red oaks, trees that are classified in the red oak group, such as Spanish oak, blackjack oak, and water oak, are very, very susceptible. These trees will die within weeks after infection. As opposed to that, we have a number of white oaks in Texas. This is just a small sample. Our most resistant white oak is post oak. It's a very, very common tree throughout the range of oak wilt as well as other parts of the state. And I have in my 30-some year career working on oak wilt seen maybe a half dozen post oaks die of oak wilt. It's very, very rare. However, these other oaks are also distributed throughout the range, and they have varying degrees of susceptibility and resistance. And we come to the live oak, which is the primary oak. It is the dominant oak throughout the range of oak wilt in Texas. And we have two species, Quercus virginiana and Quercus fusiformis, although they are very, very similar. And a lot of times it takes an expert to distinguish those two trees. And live oak is variable in its response to oak wilt, as far as red oaks and white oaks go. And it is also classified by some experts in the red oak group and other experts in the white oak group. And consistent with that, we get about a 15 to 20% survival rate of live oaks in an oak wilt center. And in that 15 to 20%, we will see some trees look untouched. Other trees might lose 90% of their crown. Other than that, though, usually somewhere about 7 to 8 or 9 trees out of 10 will die, of the live oaks will die of oak wilt. Live oak has some other unique characteristics. For example, that live oak is a root sprouting species. When there's a site disturbance like a fire and other vegetation is eliminated, live oak will very rapidly colonize the site and throw up its root sprouts. And this is one of the reasons why it is the predominant tree on the Edwards Plateau of Central Texas. The Edwards Plateau of Central Texas was once part of the southernmost extension of the Great Plains, but due to land management practices, fire control, and these sorts of things, the ecology has changed and live oak has come to dominate the vegetation in the hill country of Texas. That plays a very important role in the epidemiology, which we will talk about in just a moment. Now, I have a disease cycle, which is, if you are really interested in understanding oak wilt, it is important to understand the disease cycle and why we make the recommendations we do to control oak wilt in Texas. And in Texas, we break it down into the red oak phase and the live oak phase. Now, the red oak phase is very similar to oak wilt in Kentucky or Tennessee or Indiana or Wisconsin. It's very similar to how oak wilt occurs in other parts of the country. However, those other parts of the country do not have live oak. And so as a result of that, we break off live oak because the fungus behaves differently in the live oak than it does in the red oak. Now, I'm going to go through this very rapidly and pointing out key parts of the disease cycle. We start with a healthy red oak. And the red oak will, let's say it becomes diseased by the spread of a knitted beetle, a tiny insect which is carrying the fungus. And the knitted beetle must go to a fresh wound on the red oak in order to inoculate the tree. So this red oak might be connected to another tree by root connections, root grafts, in which it would spread the tree or the fungus to that other tree, or a couple of fates may happen to that red oak. For example, it may get infected early in the summer and it will then die very quickly, or it may get infected late in the summer, at which point it will be dying in the fall. Now, these trees that make it through the summer and are still alive in the fall are very, very important, because it's on those trees that a fungal mat forms, which is a mat of fungal tissue that forms underneath the bark of the tree. It is very, very sweet smelling and attracts insects to it, so that the insects go into the fungal mat, they feed and breed on it, they reemerge. Now, all this is occurring in the spring, following the year of infection. They reemerge, and if there are any wounded red oaks nearby, then they will spread the fungus to, they will be attracted to those wounds and spread the fungus to those wounds. It is only knitted beetles that spread this fungus. Some of you that may be mildly familiar with oak wilt may read the literature and see that some people implicate bark beetles for spread of this pathogen. I do not agree with that. I think that it's only the knitted that spread the fungus. Now, our knitted dullard beetle might also be attracted to a wound on a live oak. And if so, and notice down here, just as an aside, red oaks can be connected to live oaks by root connections. So a live oak might be connected by means of root connections and root grafts, or the live oak may be infected by the knitted dullard beetle flying to a wound on a diseased live oak. And then here in Texas, things move very, very rapidly because the fungus spreads very rapidly from tree to tree through the root connections that are formed by that root sprouting characteristic that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the hill country of Central Texas. So we get these huge, rapidly expanding oak wilt centers in Central Texas, which we call local spread, and the fungus will spread from tree to tree, killing them, but we get no fungal mats on live oaks, we get no beetle spread, so it's kind of a dead end for live oaks. So the two phases are different in that in the red oak populations, the fungus can perpetuate itself based on the fungal mats. In live oak populations, it will only spread underground locally from one tree to the next. There is no beetle spread that occurs in live oak. So with that as a background, let's talk about oak wilt control. Certainly, it always starts with diagnosis. It always starts with diagnosis. So let's go, and I will go through these other steps one at a time as well, but let's go ahead and talk a little bit about oak wilt diagnosis. And I like to break oak wilt diagnosis down into essentially 5 steps. And the first of those steps is looking at the pattern of disease in the population of trees. And here, again, as I have done, I contrast the live oaks with how it behaves in the red oak. So since we only have root spread from one tree to the next in live oaks, we get these large expanding disease centers, that is depicted here on the image on my left. And I can walk into an oak wilt center like this, and generally you walk up to one of the trees in the middle, and you can assume that it was one of those trees that became infected first. And then the fungus will simply radiate out from one tree to the next, forming these disease centers. And this is what happens when we have nothing but live oak. And this is very, very common in the hill country. We have large expanses of pure stanza live oak. As I said, the tree propagates disturbed sites very rapidly, and it has a competitive advantage on all the other on the small list of other tree species that are actually native out in Central Texas. Now, if we bring red oak into the population, then things change a little bit. If you recall, red oaks are able to support fungal mats, and we get insect spread. So that if a red oak in the population of oaks becomes infected, then the insects will disperse, and they don't disperse regularly. For example, we have a diseased red oak right here, and assuming that might have had a fungal mat on it, it looks like the beetle might have gone through the woods right here and infected another red oak right here, skipping these trees right here. And as you can see throughout the population, this is down near Bandera, Texas, and kind of the southwest corner of the range of the disease. There are lots of red oaks in these populations in this part of the range, and therefore we get a much more dispersed type of pattern throughout the population. Now, if you're walking into a stand of oaks for the first time and you're seeing a lot of mortality, I generally tell people try to get a feel for how rapidly the trees are dying and how the trees are dispersed throughout the population to start giving you a clue of whether or not it's oak wilt or not. Now, we can also contrast the live oaks and the red oaks in the rate of death. In a live oak, as is depicted on the left, and unfortunately this picture is taken on the Texas A&M campus, we can see a healthy live oak on the right and one on the left that has picked up the fungus as it spread from one tree to the next farther to the left, and it's just moving down the street. So that our epidemiology work has shown that that tree on the right has over a 98% chance of catching the disease in its position right there. Now, this tree on the left, however, does have a 15 to 20% chance of survival, and it will probably be 12 to 14 months before we know whether it's going to die completely or be one of those in the survival category. This is what I talk about when I say that the disease rate of death in individual trees in live oak are more variable. Now, if we look on the right, we have a small red oak right here that is in the active stage of colonization by the fungus. We have a dead one you can see over the right side of its crown, and we have another dying one in the back there. And it could very well be that this dead one had fungal mats on it, and it is now spread by insects to these two neighbors right here. However, following initial symptom appearance, a red oak will die within about 4 to 6 weeks after it is originally infected or shows symptoms. And it usually takes about 3 or 4 weeks for the tree to show symptoms after it becomes infected. So we usually get from the point of infection to death in a red oak, you can usually count on maybe 8 weeks or so, depending on the size of the tree. As I said, in the upper left-hand corner, just to remind you, this tree that is completely brown, if this was in September or October, this tree would not have fungal mats on it because it's going to be dried out by the time the fall comes around. But this tree right here, this is a very, very good candidate if this is late in the summer for fungal mat production the following spring. Foliar symptoms can be good clues for us. In the live oak, we have a very, very symptomatic our key symptom that we look for when we go into an oak wilt center. We call it venal necrosis. This only occurs in live oaks. It is distinctive, and if you look in the lower right-hand corner here, you'll see leaves from the previous year still hold this kind of venal necrosis symptom. So you can walk around in an old disease center and look for leaves that are laying around that reflect this venal necrosis. We also have some other odd patterns that we've never been able to explain. For example, this vein banding looks a lot like iron chlorosis, will sometimes occur on live oaks, and we do have some other patterns as well which are less common, and we usually don't bring it up to the average homeowners and master gardeners a whole lot because they're a little more variable, and sometimes we're not sure what they mean. Now, if we look at red oak on the right, however, we can see that the red oak symptoms are very similar to what occurs in any of the red oak species throughout the range of oak wilt in the United States. For example, these symptoms would be very typical of northern red oak up in Minnesota, or back in my home state of West Virginia, scarlet oak would look like this. Red oak symptoms are usually typified as a bronzing of the foliage, which usually then turns into a light brown necrotic look. The leaves may or may not cling to the tree depending on the rate at which the tree died. The fourth step, and I see this fungal mat on the left is kind of fuzzy, so let's focus on this one on the right, is the presence of a fungal mat. Now, only about 1 out of 20 red oaks form fungal mats, so it's not a really good key criteria. I've had master's candidates go through their entire careers on oak wilt in Texas and never see a fungal mat. You really have to go out and look for them. This is one of those limiting steps of the epidemiology of the disease, which is why oak wilt has not achieved its potential as far as mortality goes in lots of the range throughout the United States. It's this requirement for fungal mat formation. I've popped the bark off of this fungal mat. This one is about maybe 6 inches long and 3 inches wide, and it has the classic pressure cushion on the middle of the fungal mat, which pushes the bark off the surface of the tree. It makes a crack down the center of the tree, and then the nididula beetles can smell a very, very sweet, fruity smell that comes from the fungal mats. They are attracted to it. If you're downwind from a red oak that has 40 or 50 fungal mats on it, you can pick this smell up 10, 15, 20 feet away. It is so distinct. Keep in mind, though, this only occurs on red oaks. You will not find fungal mats on live oaks in Texas. And finally, we have a clinical test. By removing bole and branch samples from infected trees, they can be sent into a plant diagnostic clinic. Here in Texas, we have the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab. Here's a bole sample that has been removed by cutting a window in the side of the tree. The clinic will chip this piece up into smaller pieces, put it on potato dextrose agar that's been acidified, and if we get the classic growth of the fungus, then we are very sure that that tree has oak wilt. This process takes usually about 2 to 3 weeks. It is fairly reliable if a proper sample is sent in. However, we do get false negatives and a lot of negatives, and so clinical diagnosis does work. You have to work with the clinician and pay careful attention to the responses you get back when you send in a sample for oak wilt. But it is 100% reliable when we get a positive. And given the fact that oak wilt control can be very expensive and environmentally disruptive, we do recommend that people try to get a confirmation before they spend a lot of money on controlling the disease. And this is the clinic website for the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Laboratory. If you go to the right on submission forms and instructions, you will get detailed instructions there on how to collect an oak wilt sample and how to pack it and send it into the clinic. Keeping in mind, for example, that the fungus is heat sensitive, and if you're sampling this time of year, you have to take cautions to keep that sample cool from the time it is removed from the tree to the time it reaches the clinic. And again, there are good instructions on the clinic website on how to do that. Oak wilt can be confused with other problems. I'm not going to go into this in great deal. Some of you may be aware that we've had a serious drought in Texas, and therefore we do emphasize during periods of drought to try to enlist the help of the clinic for diagnosis. If we look at oak wilt symptoms here and drought symptoms with the tip burn in the lower right-hand corner, sometimes people will take drought to be oak wilt, so we have to caution people to be sure to get a confirmation before they're treating trees. Again, just looking at trees out in the field, it's virtually impossible to tell drought from oak wilt. So that is very, very hard. I even have difficulties at times distinguishing drought from oak wilt. Red oak, same thing. Here's a blackjack over here that is dying of drought. This was in 2011, and these symptoms right here could be taken as oak wilt very, very easily. Very hard to distinguish from these oak wilt symptoms over here. So getting on to the next couple of control measures, we have avoiding wounding in the spring from February 1 through the end of June so that we don't open up infection courts for the nididulid beetle. And we also recommend using wound paints to keep the nididulid beetles from being attracted to the wound and being able to deposit the spores on the surface of the wound. Now, I know this flies in the face of a lot of people who feel that wound paints are unnecessary on wounded trees, and I would agree with that in any other circumstance except oak wilt. There are ways to prevent mats from forming as well. You can deep girdle the tree. What we're trying to do here is get the tree to dry out very rapidly so the fungal mat does not form at all, so that the nididulid beetle does not have the opportunity to pick up the fungus and spread it onto new trees. So this is a very simple recommendation, but we think it is very, very important to do. Cautious movement of firewood. Fungal mats can move around on firewood if the red oaks are removed from a disease center. So therefore, we recommend that only extremely well-seasoned wood be moved around. The fungal mats only last for a couple weeks. So if that wood sits out all summer long, then the following fall, then it's going to be safe for use. Yeah, a lot of people ask me, well, can the fungus move up through the smoke? And naturally, fire kills all living things, so we recommend burning up the wood during the season you obtain the wood, so that the following spring you don't have these logs laying around that may form the fungal mats. Again, we also recommend people cover the firewood with plastic to keep the nididula beetles from being able to emerge, and also it allows the firewood to be heated up so that the nididula beetles and the fungal mats will be killed underneath the plastic. One of our commonly used control measures, and this one's more direct, all these others have been preventative. One of the more direct ways to control the disease is to trench and kill the root systems, or break up the root systems. We recommend in Texas going at least 4 feet deep. This varies from state to state, but our research and practice have shown that 4 feet is pretty good at breaking the root systems sufficiently deep to get all those root connections. And then we recommend roguing of the disease on the interior of the disease center. Just showing a couple of operations here in the images on this slide. We have a number of instruments that are used to do this. You will notice that all of them are very, very heavy. If we look underneath the backhoe, you can see that in Texas, in central Texas, we're going through a lot of rock. It's caliche, the soils are very, very thin. Now up in Minnesota, they can use vibratory plows and things that are much easier to get through the soil, but here we have to use these kinds of instruments to be able to dig a trench. There are a few important things about trenches to keep in mind. If you look at the image on the right here, we recommend a 100-foot barrier from the outermost symptomatic tree to the place where we dig the primary trench right here. Leaving a lot of symptomless trees in this hot zone, in this barrier right here, these trees may or may not be infected with a fungus, but our work has shown that 100 foot is just about optimal for capturing the fungus on the inside of the trench. Now, again, we recommend roguing all these trees on the inside of the trench. However, in urban environments where they do trenching, and they do a lot of trenching in San Antonio, Dallas, Waco, and Austin, and some of the big urban areas in the state, they will take these trees and do the next control measure that we're going to talk about, injecting instead of having them removed. But when you're out on the ranches, we have clearly demonstrated that roguing these trees will increase the efficacy of the trench to be able to stop the spread of the fungus. And that brings us to direct control, intravascular injection with fungicides. This is a commonly used practice here in Texas. It is used on trees under disease pressure on the advancing margin of the disease center. So it's primarily used on live oaks. However, we do have a lot of arborists that use it on red oaks as well. You can treat therapeutically and preventatively. We have a lot of numbers on your expectations of what will happen with these kinds of injections. We do recommend still the exposed root flare with high volumes of fungicides at very low concentrations. This is a typical operation here in the image where we are containing the fungicide in a couple of modified garden sprayers, and we are pumping the fungicide into the root flares of the trees with this, it's called a harness kit. It is simply a system of plastic tubes and tees that have been inserted into holes drilled around the outside of the root flares right there to try to maximize the distribution of the fungicide in the tree. The Alamo is the name of the fungicide that is used to treat trees. There are alternative products, generic products on the market now, Kestrel and Qualipro. Although the pricing is about the same as Alamo, and a lot of arborists prefer the older product, the Alamo, over these newer generics. And there are alternative injection techniques. Texas A&M is not in the habit of recommending these injection techniques, and there are a lot of gizmos on the market now and being purported to be faster and easier to use. I never like to give people the impression that oak wilt is easy to control. It is not. And at this point, we're still waiting to see how these alternative products and alternative injection techniques are going to shake out in the market. And we are largely letting the market determine whether they're going to last or not. Finally, we do recommend replanting in sites that have had oak wilt. Believe it or not, we recommend planting oaks back into oak wilt centers because we feel that there is little hooking up with the vascular system of the diseased and dead trees. So there's no way for the tree to pick up the fungus. It's like starting over with a clean slate once all the trees are dead and out of the area. And so therefore, you can plant oaks. However, if you are looking for other species, I recommend going to the Texas Forest Service website and going to their residential tree planting guide. This is a great tool to use. You click on that and it will ask you where you're located. It will ask you what kinds of trees you want to put in, and you will eventually, after a questionnaire, get to some recommendations. In this case, I clicked on Williamson County. I think I went through medium-sized trees, and these are the alternatives that it gave me. And there are more choices as well, so you can click through that. So when you are looking for new trees to plant, this is a great tool to use. So we have a lot of tools to control oak wilt. As I said, they can be, as you can see, they are environmentally disruptive. They can be very expensive depending on where you're located with regard to injection. When you walk into an oak wilt center, you have to make some choices. You have to have a practiced eye as to where you would lay down a trench, for example. In this example, and this one's not perfect, but I looked at these diseased trees right here and said, okay, I'm assuming this is greater than 100 feet right here. So I recommended putting the trench in right here. In this hypothetical case, I would recommend removing these trees right here. I would recommend giving therapeutic injections to these trees right here, and then giving preventative treatments to the trees along the outside of the trench. We have shown that trenches are about 70 to 80% effective, so you're going to have some breakovers at times, usually because the trench wasn't put in deep enough, and so therefore it's a good idea if you have high value trees to have those on the outside of the trench treated preventatively. So you put all these tools together, and we have found that we can control oak wilt very nicely in Texas and also save trees. And these practices are commonly implemented throughout that 60, 70 acre area that I depicted in the range of oak wilt in Texas. For further information on oak wilt in Texas, the Texas Forest website is absolutely outstanding, texasoakwilt.org. This is maintained by the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and they do a fabulous job of keeping updated information on it. And also plantclinic.tamu.edu is an excellent site to use as well. And Mung Mung, with that, I think I've covered the bases with oak wilt.
Thank you, thank you.